Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Sorry for the delay. We think we've cured most of the gremlins, but there may be a couple of connectivity issues, but we'll keep on going. So if you've been enjoying this submarine series, as I have, we had a great show with Mark Stilley last Friday talking about Imperial Japanese submarines. Ian Ballantyne is on tomorrow talking about British submarine operations in the Indian Ocean in 1945, but we haven't yet tackled the U-boats and the U-boats and their famous commanders. So that's what we're talking about today. And there are plenty of videos on YouTube about U-boats and their skippers. But today's guest actually got to know some of these men, and that's why he's here. So talking about some of these skippers is Harry Cooper of Shark Hunters. The link to his website, Shark Hunters, is in the description below. And it's a huge resource of U-boat and submarine information. I urge you to go and look at it. And I'll bring Harry in now. Good afternoon, Harry. How are you today?
Very fine, sir. And how are you, Paul?
I'm good. So hopefully gremlins are cured there. So, I mean, we'll start talking about these skippers in a minute. But obviously, we're at the end of the era where anybody who served in World War II is with us now. I mean, even guys who were 17 and 18 in 1944, 1945, they're 97, 98, 99 years old now. So my first question before we talk about these guys is, how important is it to hear what these people themselves said?
It's critically important. Anybody, as you say, anybody can go to the website and find the stats, whether they're accurate or not. The internet has a reputation of being sort of accurate, but anybody can find out who sank what ships, where they were born, where they were raised, what their high school was. But it's coming on 41 years that I've been doing this full time. I get up 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm at my desk 4:15, 4:30, and I go until 8 o'clock at night. And the beauty of it, the blessing, I started this 41 years ago, and I got to meet all the great skippers, Kretschmer, Top, Hardig, and Merton, so many. And they saw that I was giving their history honestly, without propaganda. And so they networked me with all their comrades, etc. And looking at the war, for instance, and the propaganda. I was a kid during the war years, and Germans were all Nazis. They machine gun people in the water for sport and God knows how many other things. And it wasn't true. You cannot. Well, World War I, for instance, they were told they used to rape young women to death and fire their lifeless bodies out the torpedo tubes. Terrible. But nobody bothered to ask, where do you find young women out in the high seas? As a commander, you cannot tell your troops, the guy in the other uniform on the other battlefield loves his country like you love yours. He's got a wife and kids like you do. He goes to the same church you do. Now go kill him.
Yeah.
I used to belong to Rotary. I found out Otto Kretschmer was a Rotarian also. These were just decent people, honorable, fighting for their country. Whether the people at the top were right, wrong, or otherwise, that's another whole ball game. But these guys, just like me, I was a gung-ho, proud American at 18 years old, ran right off, joined the Air Force, wanted to kill commies because we were told they were terrible people. Since then, I've spent time in Russia, and they're no different than you and me.
Well, that's the thing. The politics is one thing. The men themselves is very different. It's Shifty Powers' line in Band of Brothers, you know, when he talks about the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge, you know, that maybe he'd go for a drink with them. Maybe they'd go fishing together. And that's the point. But anyway, We're going to talk about these gentlemen. So we've got four we're going to talk about today. So basically, you know, each person we talk about, folks, we're going to start with a slide listing their career. And of course, there's always debate about how many ships and what the tonnage is. And it's really the reason Harry is here, as we said, is to talk about what they were like as people. So let's legendary figure in submarines. So start the ball rolling. What was he like? How was he to deal with?
He was so different from what you would think. You see this photo you've got up here with the stereotypical so-called Nazi sneer. He was not that way. He was a fun guy. He had a great sense of humor, and he liked to play tricks on Eric Top, who was the third most successful skipper. Uh, he was warm, friendly, honorable, and I had a sleeping room in his house. He said I was a member of his family. I've been in his home I don't know how many times, and he's been over here to the U.S. a couple of times to visit. And it was such a tragic, not only tragic death, but the aftermath. On the 3rd of August, 1998, I believe it was, he and his wife were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. She was a nice lady. She was a former doctor, woman's doctor, OB-GYN. And they were on a luxury cruise on the Donau River, which in Austria is called the Danube. And he slipped and fell down the stairs, cracked his head, and he never woke up. 2 days later, on the 5th, he died. That was sad enough. But the only press that gave him any credit was the British press. In the German press, he wasn't mentioned at all. His wife was not allowed to have a funeral for him. He was cremated and his ashes tossed in the North Sea. He was a fine gentleman. He had a warm heart. There was, in the early stages, they were under the so-called prize regulations. In other words, you had to stop a freighter, a submarine had to stop a freighter, go aboard and check to make sure that they did not have war materials. And if they did, then they would make sure the people on board were safe and then sink the ship. Well, he stopped a ship west of France, several hundred miles, and he found they did have war material on board. So he told the skipper of that cargo ship, get everybody in the lifeboats because I'm going to sink your ship. So they were getting into the lifeboats, and he saw there was a very high number of women and children. So he went back to that skipper and said, change of plans. Everybody get back aboard. You are now a prize of Germany. And he gave him a course. I'll be right behind you underwater. And if you change course, I'll sink you. Well, okay, the guy took off, not realizing he's doing 10 knots. And a submerged submarine can't keep up with 10 knots. And unfortunately, he got almost to Lorient, and the Luftwaffe didn't know what was going on, and they sank the ship. But Kretschmer had a warm heart, helped people in the water. In the early stages of the war, the U-boats could stay on the surface and help the people they sank. Once the war got going and the Brits and the Americans got the anti-submarine stuff, the U-boats couldn't stay on the surface anymore.
Well, brilliant introduction, Harry. So one of the things that we've been talking about over this series is people who are watching, the idea of spending your time under the water in a metal tube that leaks and smells and oil everywhere and the smell of body odor everywhere, and the knowledge that usually your death will be horrible and violent and slow, usually, you know. So what makes a good U-boat skipper? Is there one thing that people like Otto and these other guys you interviewed, is there one common trait you think they had, or is it depend on the individual?
It's a great question, because we have a lot of videos that we've taken with these skippers, and one of the interview questions was, what makes a good skipper? The opinions vary, but some of the ones that are solid all the way through, you have to be honorable. You have to, like Top would say, you have to know your crew. Kretschmer said they were like a band of brothers. They all thought very highly of Gross Admiral Dönitz, who was only Captain zur See when they started the war. They all thought he was a great man. He knew everybody on every boat. He met every boat coming back. And the skippers and just about everybody thought he was a great man.
Thank you. And you've sent these photos. We'll go back that one because it seems that we talk about with West Point, there was that class of 1915 that the stars fell on, and you had your Bradleys and Van Fleets, and the same thing often applied to some of the greatest U-boat commanders. Is they had this kind of common class and where they came from. So talk about where the U-boat, if you like, this spirit came from, because it started in the 1930s. It wasn't World War II. It was before World War II. So give us a rundown on where these commanders found their were trained, and where it all began.
It was very difficult to get into submarine school because in the 30s, Germany was not allowed to have submarines. So you can't very well train submarine crews. However, and we broke this story, the new, it was not the Kriegsmarine, it was the Reichsmarine at that time. They decided they wanted to have submarines, even though they were not allowed to have submarines. So they worked with some of the German shipyards, and they opened fake companies in the Netherlands to build submarines under Netherlands identity to be sold to other countries. And of course, Germany was allowed to have anti-submarine forces, so they trained the submarine crews to operate the submarines, and said, well, they have to know how to operate a submarine to work as anti-submarine people. Well, then later they came out. Most people don't realize German U-boats were in combat sinking ships in 1936 in Operation Ursula, which was named for Dönitz's daughter, Ursula Hessler, who was also a member of Shark Hunters until her passing. The submarines went into Spanish-controlled waters and was sinking the communist ships coming in. I won't say the number because I'd forget it. 30-something, there were two of them. That's how they got started into it, and that was the cream of the crop. The U-boats, they were like, they were supposed to look like pirates coming back into port. Dönitz told them they should. But Kretschmer, I asked him why he never wore a white hat. The photo you got up now is the famous golden horseshoe. Most conning tower emblems were painted. Here they found a horseshoe in the flukes of their anchor. So they cleaned it up, painted it gold, and screwed it to the conning tower fairweather. But a lot of the crews, you see them all bearded and shaggy looking coming back into port. You've seen the pictures. Not U-99. I asked him that, and he looked at me like I was crazy. Why I didn't wear a white cap? It wasn't issue, Harry. And he said, when they came back into port, they'd pull up outside and stop, and everybody took a shower. Everybody shaved. Fresh coveralls were given out to everybody. And the second watch stood at attention on the afterdeck. The first watch stood at attention on the foredeck. And I remember as if it was yesterday, he said, "We are not pirates, Harry. We are professional submariners." So, and you talk to the crewmen. What boat did you serve on? I was on U-46. What were you? Well, I was on U-153. On this one, I was on Otto Kretschmer's boat. They would have gone through fire for this guy. I know a lot of his crewmen. Great man.
And so many people watching this who didn't have the opportunity that you did to meet these guys. I think so many people's frame of reference for U-boats is Das Boot, either the original 1980s version or the remake sequel that's around today. It's another interesting question. The guys you met, I mean, they were obviously around when Das Boot came out. Did they think that was an accurate version of their lives or a terrible version? Did they differ on what they thought about it?
They didn't bicker at all. They hated it. When you pressed them, they would say it's a Wonderful movie. It's absolutely correct, but they hated the guy who wrote the book,
Right.
Lothar Gunther Buchheim. Not because of that book, Das Boot, and it's not Das Boot. Das Boot was an excellent movie. I mean, there's Das Boot and all the other submarine movies. I mean, This is head and shoulders above everything. But his next book after Das Boot, I forget the name. It never got translated into any other language outside of German. But the title basically, we're winning until they kill us, something like that. And the whole book was a slap at Karl Dönitz.
Mm.
And so you can't expect to have the U-boaters love your book if you're against the guy they revere.
No, and that's the thing that, when you were meeting these guys, regardless of what we think as historians about why people serve their countries, you have to understand why these people. I remember I was in Normandy with a Fallschirmjäger veteran, so German airborne veteran from Normandy, and he was flicking through my book. And when he got to a picture of Rommel, Field Marshal Rommel, he instinctively kind of stood up straight and kind of, and that's it. I can stand here and debate whether or not Rommel was a good general or not. In fact, we've got a show on in a couple of weeks' time about whether or not Rommel was an overrated or underrated, whatever it would be. But the point is, some of the men who served under Rommel carried that respect for him for the rest of their lives, just as people who served under Montgomery or Patton or MacArthur loved them, hate them. That's their opinions, regardless of whether we agree with them. It's their opinions. So,
right,
I'm going to put the photos up of you meeting Otto here. So you said you had a sort of you had a spare room in his house just for you.
Right.
When you're talking about these patrols, how did you go in there and did you let him talk? Did you put questions to him? Did you let him? I mean, he's a U-boat skipper. Did he control the conversation, or did you control the conversation?
It was when I was there with him. And you see that right side photo. He's showing me some of his tactics at sea. This is in his library. Wow. This was just a chat between friends. We did interview him formally, which we have that DVD for sale. We interviewed him formally, and the interviewer would ask a question, Kretschmer would answer, and he let us know about the so-called happy times. Mm. He said it wasn't a happy time, even the first one. He said he went out with one of 6 submarines and only 3 came back. He said that's not a happy time. But the propaganda company for the people back home, you got to have the people back home. You didn't have TV back in those days. You didn't have email, Google, or any of this. You had the local movie place. What the hell? Yeah, movie theater.
Yeah.
Every Saturday we'd go and we'd see a short little 15-minute clip on a series like Flash Gordon or whatever. Then we'd have the feature. Then they'd have the movie tone news. And that's where the people back home were getting the news. And it was very carefully sanitized and crafted in favor of the Americans for us, in favor of the Germans for whatever the hell. Fucking, yeah. So the questions were very carefully asked and very carefully answered. Otto was no fool. This guy, he was not, I didn't hire him. I only was the group leader. He wanted so hard to get Otto to put his hand in the air, which incidentally is a Roman salute. It's not a Nazi salute. But anyhow, he kept asking Otto to salute. And Otto says, I can't. I don't have my hat on. So this guy said, well, pretend you have your hat on. And so Otto says, okay, this is the salute. Mm. And the guys in the U-boats never used the party salute until after the July 44 attempt on Hitler's life. Then they had a propaganda guy on board. And it was not uncommon for the propaganda guy to be up on deck dumping garbage and have the boat suddenly dive out from under him.
Wow.
And never see him again.
So that photo there of, you said that he's absolutely telling you about his patrols and what, so was he telling, how much autonomy did someone like Kretschmer have when he was going out? Because obviously the fleet is under command of Dönitz. There's a whole wolf pack at La. There's Condor aircraft often organizing the reconnaissance, blah, blah, blah. But someone like Kretschmer, how much autonomy does he command with instinct, or is it always orders, or is it a combination of the two?
He told me he had a little problem with Dönitz in the early days. Dönitz was a captain at the time. He was commander of the U-boats. And Dönitz loved to talk back and forth to his guys, which was fatal. And Dönitz kept refusing to answer. And he got back home, and Kretschmer, kept refusing to answer. And so Dönitz called him aside when he got home, and he chewed him out a little bit. And Kretschmer said, "My responsibility is not to answer your radio calls. My responsibility is to my ship and my crew." And he said, "I know we can be located if we're on the radio too much." And Dönitz, according to what Kretschmer told me, Dönitz said, "Okay, but don't let the others know."
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel we could talk all day about each of these skippers, and maybe we'll bring you back for some more, but I'm conscious of the time. Let's move on to
Let me
Eric
stop
Topp.
for a second on that one.
Yep.
This one. This is very important to me. We were on his outside patio, and he was reading that newspaper. I was on the other side of the round table, breakfast table, and Mrs. Kretschmer was in a chase lounge working a newspaper puzzle on American TV doctors, and I was helping her. And their little schnauzer named Yuli came and laid down right on my feet. And in this picture, just after this picture, Otto lowered the newspaper, looked at me, looked at his dog, and he says, "Yuli is content. My family is complete." My God, if you can't imagine.
Wow.
Oh, wow. A great man. I studied him in high school. Never dreamed I would meet him.
Wow.
But anyhow.
No, this insight you're bringing us is fantastic. And again, as you said, the YouTube is full of, and the internet is full of stats and details, and which patrol left off and which port and went there and sunk this. What we want and what you're delivering is who these guys were. So thanks for that. So Eric Topp, I mean, another absolutely legendary name. You know, I mean, if in England, if Carlsberg did U-boat commanders, Eric Topp is at the top of the list. You know, I mean, one of those legends. So another one that you got to meet. So summarize Eric Topp for us.
Topp was a fun guy, and that photo you have on the right, that was sent around, you know, because these guys were the rock stars of the early part of the war, and there he's peering through the periscope, and it was in the newspaper and on the TVs, and he was getting fan mail. They got fan mail, these U-boat skippers, and he got one with this picture from some young lady, and she said she would like to be his periscope. And you can read into that. You can figure it out yourself. He was very close to his crew, worried about, they put to sea one time, and his Obersteuermann, his navigator, forgot to bring along a little talisman, which was his good luck. And after about a day at sea, Topp asked what his problem was. He could see the guy was upset, and he told him. So he went back to port so his buddy, or his Obersteuermann, could pick up that little talisman.
Wow.
And he was lucky. He almost got sunk with his first boat, U-57, got stuck in the mud like you see in Das Boot, and they had to run back and forth, and finally it came loose, and you get something with that, as the ballast tanks are all blown, and they finally get out of the mud, and it's like a cork shot right to the surface, and there was destroyers nearby, but it was the middle of the night, so they went away very low power, keeping the small silhouette, the stern, pointed towards the destroyers. He lost that boat in. Go ahead.
I was just going to. One of the things we talked about with the Japanese submarines on Friday was how the Japanese didn't really use submarines effectively. If they just got their act together and had a combined arms approach, they'd have done something better. And so, when we're talking about the U-boat fleet, I mean, as I said earlier, it's not just the U-boat. It's the Condors, it's the aircraft, it's intelligence, it's the other elements as well. So Bruce Day is saying, you know, you brought up the Luftwaffe. What did submariners think of the Luftwaffe? What did submariners think of the aviators who involved? Did they kind of realize they were part of the team, or did they think they were what was the inter-service rivalry like? Is I guess what I'm asking.
The ones I've met who knew some of the flyboys had high respect for them, and one of the guys, Otto Giese, who was first officer on, I forget the boat, but during the Battle of Convoy PQ-18, I think it was, they picked up some of the flyboys off of a downed German aircraft. And once the battle was over and they were heading back towards port, Otto was talking to this one pilot, and he was trying to tell him how great it was on the submarines. And the pilot says, no. He said, if I'm in my airplane and I get hit, I can bail out with my parachute. If you get hit at 300 feet down, you just die like a damn rat. Those were his words. And he said, I will never go into the submarines. I myself joined the Air Force.
No, definitely. I mean, and the next photo, which is one of the ones on the internet, the photo of Eric there with all the flowers, because you talked about they were absolutely rock stars. I mean, they were the Instagram influencers of their day, and I can't for a second imagine the contrast between spending up to weeks on end in a metal smelly tube under the ground, and suddenly you return to base and you're treated like, you know, Michael Jackson or the Beatles. How did someone like Eric Top deal with that contrast in his career? You know, 1 minute you're literally fighting for your life under the sea, then you're back there and the news cameras are there and people want a piece of you and you're having to answer fan mail. How on earth did they deal with that?
It varied with each guy, of course, but with Top, I knew Top very well. I've been to his house, I don't know how many times. He'd been over here to visit me. He was a consummate professional when they were on the boat. When he got back here, you see him. He was a good-looking guy, and he was a hero, and he had lots of girlfriends, and he almost ran into a problem when he was at the in Berchtesgaden, at the Berghof. He was being decorated with, I think it was his Knight's Cross, probably, or maybe, there's the picture. It was Captain Lieutenant there. This is when he was going in for his oak leaf. And they have several days resting there. And he was busily trying to put the make on this pretty young girl. And his flotilla commander called him aside. He said, you idiot, that's Ava Braun. Stop trying to put the make on the Fuhrer's woman. He was so fun.
Wow.
He and I were at a trade show out in Santa something or another, just outside of San Francisco many, many years ago. Oh, he was the life of the party. He was always happy. Yeah, there's the pictures, the bottom right, when we were there in Santa whatever, or San something. He was signing autographs, and just his English was flawless. So he would stop and talk to everybody coming by. We had a lot of our members come by, and they met him because we have a membership. People can join Shark Hunters, get the magazine every month, and all that information's on sharkhunters.com. Top was there. He signed photos for us, and it's a loss when all these guys died. Personal.
I mean, it is fascinating. I mean, when I was down in, I forget whether I was in Lorient or I was in La Rochelle. I forget which port I was at in Brittany. I was at the museums there. And all the books for sale were about U-boat commanders. There was no books for sale about Royal Navy anti-submarine operations. And I understand that the U-boat skippers and the crews had a huge draw in World War II. And I understand today why they have a whole huge draw on the public, and why your website and the I mean, there's more websites about U-boats than there are British submarines or American submarines. Did people like Eric Top and Otto, did they understand in the 80s and 90s when you knew these guys? Did they understand why people were kind of borderline obsessed with their role in World War II?
Again, that varies from man to man, but the bottom line, the common denominator was that they had all been living kind of in shame because of the propaganda. And when shark hunters came along, they were just happy to give me all their stories because we told the stories like they really were.
Hmm.
Horrible Nazis machine gunning and people in the water. That didn't happen. All the other stories. We have one skipper who was a merchant skipper, Captain Peter Chalamedos. He got sunk by a German U-boat, and he said the sub surfaced and came alongside of him because he was the skipper, and they asked if he needed any medical help. And he said, no, everybody's okay. And so the German skipper gave him a compass and told him what direction to steer to get to the closest land. And then he said, I'd like to give you some fresh water, but our desalinator is down. Would you like a couple cases of beer instead? This is the way they were. They were honorable. Hardigan, who we'll see later, summed it up best. He says, we were not there to kill men. We were there to sink ships. Okay, so men got killed on ships. We know that. War is a terrible thing. I'm a veteran of the Air Force, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, the CIA. War is a terrible thing. There should be no wars. But if you get into a war, you got to win it. And propaganda is a very, very powerful weapon. How many people ran on down right after Pearl Harbor? How many Americans ran down to the local recruiter because their patriotism up? Prior to that, it was 87% of the United States people were against us getting involved in the European war. But now we trigger the patriotism, everybody runs out. So you have to control the narrative.
Yeah. And as we know, on your website, one of the things about your mission statement is you say that you want to bring former enemies together as friends. And it's something we've talked about a lot on this channel is the ability for men and women from both sides to be able to engage and not necessarily forgive and certainly not forget, but certainly understand that they went through the same experience. And there's certain things that, about the war that, as you said, there's awful horrors, awful murders, awful stuff there. And yet, as you say, a lot of people were just there doing their jobs. And the job of submarines, whether you're American, British or German, it's not very nice. It's not, you're often sinking merchant ships. It's not a pure war in the sense it's not noble, or it's not the way we think of war, but I'm going down a rabbit hole of talking about morals. But
well, let me pull you out of the rabbit hole. You were talking about friendships. At our first convention in Florida, 1987, I used to drink in those days. I gave that up a long time ago. But I was at the bar trying to set a new record. And on my left was a gunner from an American destroyer. On my right was Captain Hess, which we'll see in a moment, youngest submarine combat commander. And they're talking across my face. And where were you? Well, that was my area. When were you there? Well, that was when I was there. And Captain Hess said, the number on your destroyer was such and such. And Ray Lankheim says, yeah, how'd you know that? And Hess said, I fired 2 torpedoes at you on such and such day, but somebody must have seen it because you turned and I missed. And Ray Lankheim named the lookout and he says, you missed, Captain. So what do you think about that? And Hess slammed his big fist on the board. He said, well, I'm glad we missed. We have more time for beer now. And the 2 guys got to be best buddies. Wow. We had this guy here, Erich Tupp. At year 2000, we had a convention here, a gathering in Daytona Beach. And something nobody could have predicted. The last comm sub of the Soviet Navy was there also. Sworn enemies. Those guys shook hands and sat down and drank together at my convention. Yesterday's enemies are today's friends.
Wow. I mean, fantastic stuff. I mean, I'm gonna get more a question now. Rob Crane is, and this ties in what we've been talking about in this week, is did they talk about how quickly the U-boat fleet were able to adapt to changes in Allied tactics? Those who learned the hard way wouldn't have made it back to pass on their lessons, because as we know, the loss rates of U-boat crews were 70% during World War II. So So many submarines never made it back home. So many U-boat skippers didn't get to survive even 42, let alone survive the war and meet you at one of your reunions. So from your understanding of speaking to these guys and studying it, did the Germans learn to adapt to what the Allies are doing? Because you have to say the Allied response to anti-submarine warfare was pretty swift after about 41, 42. You know what the Americans are doing particularly. So did they try and adapt to what the Allies are doing in your experience?
No, not really. Black May of 43, they lost 44 submarines in combat. The United States Navy lost 52, I think it was, in the entire war, and only 40-something in combat. In the whole war, Germany lost 44 in that month alone because the Brits broke the codes, and the Huff-Duff, high-frequency directional finder, was brought in. The codes could not be broken. That's what the German hierarchy said, yet they knew they were broken. Their Taylor, another dear friend of mine, like my uncle, he said the thing that they feared most was radar because they had no counter. Eventually, they came up with something called a Biscaya Kreuz, just a broomstick-looking thing with wires around it hooked to the radio. And when it started humming, they knew they were being. But that's not like what the Brits had or the Americans had. The German U-boats were far ahead of everybody at the beginning of the war, but they did not update as fast as the Allies. And towards the end of the war, 9 out of every 10 boats that went out on their first patrol never came back. 9 out of 10.
No, it is staggering, the losses that they went through. But we'll move on. So Hess, another incredibly famous, you said there, another of the 4 we're going to talk about today. And another guy you got to meet. So there's his career up there. There's his photo. Start talking about him then, please.
Yeah, he was my best friend in Germany. He was the youngest combat submarine commander of World War II, maybe of all time. Somebody pointed out there were 3 other skippers that were younger than him. 2 of them were still in sub school, so they don't count for combat.
Right.
The other one was a member of Shark Hunter. Rudolf Arndt was 1 month younger than Hess when he took his boat, but he was in the Black Sea sinking fishing boats with machine guns, whereas Hess was in the North Sea and the Arctic. He went out. Well, he took over a boat from a guy who had been relieved of command for not cowardice, because that would have got him shot, but he was not aggressive enough. He was busted from Kapitän Leutnant to common sailor and put on an anti-aircraft gun. He was cautious because he knew the war was almost over. So here, and I got this from a man who was on a boat next to Hess when Hess took over on 995. He had his crew at attention on the foredeck, and you had to know Hess. He didn't speak. He thundered. He became a lawyer and a doctor of law after the war. He thundered. His first words to his new crew was, "You cowards, this will no longer be a yellow boat." And I know these guys, I talked to some of them, they thought, this young punk, this young Draufgänger is going to get us all killed. But he went out on 5 war patrols at a time. Nobody came home from 1. And he came home from 5 war patrols, sank a bunch of ships, and was given his Knight's Cross. And they thought the world of him. He was my best friend in Germany. He was a character. He was a lot of fun. He died.
And you said there about, his patrols there, that, they're late in the day. 44 is the pun intended, the tide had definitely turned in the North Atlantic. The happy times were but distant memories for U-boat crews. As you say, their losses were terrible. Did he have, when you spoke to him, did he ever suggest to you that he believed it was only a matter of time he'd be killed himself? I mean, I can imagine if you're a U-boat commander going out in 41, 42, you kind of think you control the seas, you think you're going to make it back home. The Kriegsmarine is in the ascendancy, but by 44, it's all going really wrong. So did he ever kind of convey to you that sense of the fact that it was almost like a suicide mission by that point?
No, most of the guys I talked to who did survive the last part of the war, they knew 1 out of 10 would come home, and it's going to be my boat. Those other 9 guys would really feel bad for them,
Yeah.
but it's always going to be the other guy. Nobody thinks they're going to go out, except for the kamikazes and the Japanese, but nobody thinks they're going to die. They think, okay, it's tough. 9 out of 10 are going to get killed. It's the other 9 guys. So he never thought he was going to be wiped out, and he was a character. He was a fun guy. He never stopped chasing women. He was married I don't know how many times, and when he came over here several times, and we'd go through some of the old plantations, and they had the marble statues. He'd go up to the statues of the women. He'd be groping their breasts, and just having a great time. That's his boat. That's the only boat. That's the only Type 7 boat left in the world. U-995.
Wow. We've got a couple of questions there. So Terry Emery is saying, how many sub-aces were there, and did the Germans have in the war? And what did the criteria change for an ace? Because we talk about the Luftwaffe aces and how the system was kind of tailored to create aces, whereas the British and Canadian flyers didn't really have that system. What defines a submarine ace, in your opinion?
There was at the beginning, there were criteria for getting the Knight's Cross, and then the oak leaf and the swords, etc. To get the Knight's Cross, you had to sink 100,000 tons of merchant shipping or 1 capital ship. Well, after a while, that was not possible. So they tailored it just kind of however they felt they needed. For instance, the highest award they had, period, Knight's Cross with oak leaf, swords, and diamonds. There were only 2 U-boat commanders that got that. One was Wolfgang Luth, who sank the same number of ships as Kretschmer, just not as much tonnage. And the other guy was Albrecht Brandy, who didn't even sink enough to qualify for a Knight's Cross, let alone oak leaf, swords, and diamonds. But this was at a time in the war when Germany needed a hero. It was at the end of the war when they were getting beat up real bad. I compare that to the beginning of the American part of the war, when a bomber pilot named Colin Kelly sank a Japanese battleship named the Haruna and was killed in the attempt, and he got decorated. We needed a hero. Turns out he never saw the Haruna. He was shot down by another one of our members, a guy named Saburo Sakai, a Japanese fighter pilot. And he bailed out of his plane, and the chute didn't open, and he died on impact. So we needed a hero at the beginning of the war. Germany needed a hero at the end. And he was a very good self-promoter. His nickname was Cherry Brandy.
Oh, nice one. Nice nickname. So we've got some more questions coming in. This is an interesting one, I think. Where did I put it? How did the U-boat skippers debrief after missions, and how did lessons learned by them and other boats get distributed, officially and unofficially? I mean, that's one of the things we're always talking about with the Allies, is that they do learn from their mistakes. And, for example, after the Americans in Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, they really look at how tanks and infantry are working together, and they try their best to cure those things. Amphibious landings, they look at what went wrong and what got better. How did it work with U-boats? So you've got the so-called happy timers, but is information being assimilated in debriefs and going up the chain of command for those at the top to decide how better to do things?
In the early days when Dönitz was in command of the U-boats, he met every boat coming back. He would have a private meeting with the skipper and go over the logbook, because everybody had to sign off. All the officers had to sign off. If they fired torpedoes, the first watch officer had to sign off, etc. So Dönitz would go over all those. Incidentally, that's a photo up there, another one of our conventions. See that guy named Beach, Captain Ned Beach, who was also an author, and he wrote, among others, Run Silent, Run Deep, which was made a great movie. So they would meet with Dönitz. Dönitz would critique everything there, and if there was anything needed to be passed on, he'd pass it on. After he got bumped up, what the heck was the guy's name that took his place as commander of the subs in the West? At any rate, he became the guy who took his place. They called him his master's voice, like the little dog on the RCA
Von
commercial.
Friedberg?
Hmm?
Von Friedberg, was it?
No, it wasn't Friedberg. No, it'll come to me. But he was member number 313 in our shark hunters. He, the new guy, it'll come to me.
No problem.
He was never in his office. He was out playing tennis with his secretary, or he was doing other things with his secretary. And so it that was in about the middle of the war. So the communications kind of dropped off. And Reusing, that was his name, Reusing. And he was not so together with his guys. He was important because he was an important guy. Dönitz, on the other hand, was important, but he knew his men. I was told by several skippers, Dönitz knew the name of every single man on the crew and what his personal situation was. You know,
Wow.
Your wife had the baby, how's everything going, etc. Whereas Reusing was not that close. So between the trade-off when Dönitz went up to Berlin and Reusing took over his place, plus the fact that the German technology didn't keep pace with the American technology, it kind of went in the bucket there.
So while we've got Hess on screen there, anything else you want to talk about in terms of his personality? Again, you know, what were his strengths as a skipper? You know, it seems that loyalty is a common denominator, and obviously an ability to survive is obviously something there. But anything else that he would talk to you about in your meetings?
Well, with Hess, he was a very strong, powerful figure. Like I say, he became a doctor of law after the military. And when he talked, he thundered, and he just commanded the group, the area. Very great. I really missed the guy. He was a wonderful friend. And I guess we all go, I'm going to die someday, but I'm putting it off as long as I can.
Well, I think we all are. And you know, you've talked about the fact that it was often at your shark hunters reunions, these guys got a chance to meet up with each other because they weren't allowed to, and the post-war time in Germany was a difficult time. But yep. Did they try and meet up after war? Obviously, you can't spend weeks on end under the sea with fellow sailors and not create a bond. Did they you know, did some of the skippers give their former crewmen jobs, or did they help them out? Was there kind of an unofficial social network after the war?
Yeah, they did that, and also they had like I belonged to the American Legion because I was in the American forces. They had a U-Bootskameradschaft in the major cities and in some of the towns. It was U-boat veterans meeting, but my Legion post has a Huey helicopter out front. We raised the flag. These guys couldn't even put a name on the damn meeting place. They had to, you know, the official position was World War what? Adolf who? They were not allowed to meet in public. They didn't march in parades, nothing. And they were happy that shark hunters came along. It gave them back their dignity, which they deserved.
Yeah, and again, it's as we said at the beginning, we can talk about them as human beings without getting into the ideology, without getting into the greater politics view. It's about them as people. So we got one more skipper to talk about today. Again, there's his career up there, Hardigan. So another legend, another one who was involved early on, you know, early career, and you know, 4 patrols, 221 days. I mean, I can't even imagine spending a few hours below the sea. not best part of 2/3 of a year in total there. So to talk about him, because he again fits that profile of the typical U-boat commander we think of, the slightly disregard for uniform regulations, the charisma there. So to talk about him.
He was, he wouldn't like me to say this probably, but he's not here. He was flamboyant. And why not? He was one of the great skippers. He sank the first ship in American waters. He was the first guy over here during Operation Drumbeat, Paukenschlag. He was the last living Paukenschlag skipper. That's his crew there. Hoffman was his first watch officer, and von Schroeder was his, and that's not O with an umlaut, that's Dutch name. He was the second watch officer. Von Schroeder took over U-123 after Hartigan got transferred off. He got his Knight's Cross. I've been over to visit von Schroeder many, many times, and they all signed some hand-signed prints that we have for sale for members. Hartigan, he was your typical captain. Ned Beach, on the American side, retired as a captain. With Kretschmer and with the various different admirals, Admiral Fluckey, an American, I'd write to them, "Dear Admiral," and I signed it respectfully, Harry Cooper. And after a while, each one wrote back and said, "Harry, I'm Otto, you're my friend." But with the captains, he was Captain Hartigan always, and Captain Beach, he was Captain Beach. I guess the jump from captain to admiral make him a little more human. He, on his second war patrol, Feinfaden, down off of Jacksonville, he almost bought the farm. He was hit by the destroyer Dahlgren, and his boat was hurt. And Dahlgren was coming back for one final pass, but he didn't drop depth charges. Hartigan said he made the mistake of not waiting till the captain's white cap popped to the surface. Well, that was just a way of words. He got a little miffed because he's ranked as the 20th most successful skipper. But he says, and he gave me what number. And I said, "Well, where's the error?" He said, "Well, some of the ships I sank in shallow water, and they refloated them, so they took that away from his credit." He says, "That's not fair." Okay, whatever works. He became extremely wealthy. And in World War I, there was a submarine, the Deutschland, which was a cargo submarine. And the commander of that was Kapitän König. And so Hartigan, we'll step back one. After World War I was over, König married a nice British girl. And he told her, "You're going to love it in Germany." And she says, "No, you're going to love it in England." So they split. And Captain König came and rented a room from Captain Hartigan's parents. The brass or the gold buttons, whatever they're made out of, off of König's uniform were resewed onto Hartigan's uniform. And Hartigan got so powerful in the government, he renamed the street in front of his house Kapitän Königweg. His house was so big, he had to have two addresses. And he was a champion type golfer. His backyard was a putting green. And one time I was there visiting him, and his yard was kind of torn up. But what happened here? Oh, the deer came into his yard and were eating the flowers, and their hoof prints made a mess. He says, "I don't know how to keep them out." I said, "You got a gun? Shoot them." Oh, Jesus, he didn't like that idea. So I told him, string a bunch of tin pans and they won't come in. And there on his 102nd birthday, he made it one more year before his kids took away his car keys. At his 103rd birthday, they took away his car keys. And he lived until 105 years.
Incredible.
We still had all his mental capacities.
We are getting lots of questions about the Allied use of technology. And it came up a lot when we talked about American submarines last week, and I'm sure it'll come up tomorrow. So, these guys you spoke to, well, a representative question here is, Lots of U-boats got attacked at night from aircraft using radar in the dark. Surely the U-boat captains talked to each other about this. I mean, how aware were these guys that the Allies had these advantages? It wasn't just the radar; it was ASDIC, it was sonar, it was ultra, all the various advantages the Allies had. How these guys that are experienced, were they aware that the Allies had all this this assistance?
They were aware of sonar and ASDIC, of course, but radar, it caught Top by surprise. He almost got wiped out. HMCS Snowflake had them on radar, and it was a heavy fog, and they never saw them coming until they were only about 50 yards away, which is what saved Top's butt, because they couldn't depress the guns enough. But they just attacked and fired the hell out of the place and reported the boat sunk. And people in the theaters back in Germany, seeing the news, they got the news that the Red Devil boat was sunk, and all his relatives were just destroyed, devastated. And then he showed up, he was alive. So they would talk about that, but the officials never really acknowledged it. They knew it was happening, but they didn't know what the defenses were.
Well, I think someone said in the side, I think Donitz himself said that he didn't understand radar. You know, I think in a debrief after the Allies captured him, he said something like, "I never understood it." So I think,
Yeah.
you know, clearly at a high level, they didn't kind of fully grasp it. But another interesting question from Bob here, and he says about you, Harry: were there any German veterans that didn't want to share their experiences with you, Harry? Did you have some commanders that, you know, didn't welcome you into their homes?
No, thank God. It was networked, and the guys I started talking to first realized we were honest historians and telling their honest history. Well, our first time there in 1988, we went to we had reservations, went to a hotel that was run by a U-boat commander, and they had the large meeting room all laid out with cold cuts. And we had about 50 people in my group. And I saw these two well-dressed, distinguished-looking gentlemen standing against a wall, not saying anything. Later, I met them, and it was Carl Friedrich Merton and Reinhard Hardegen, both Oak Leaf winners. They were standing against the wall to make sure we were not a bunch of raving Nazis or Nazi hunters, but were historians. Then they identified themselves to us, and that opened the door. They talked to all their friends, and they said, "Hey, this guy's telling the true story." There was not a single one who wouldn't talk to me.
Wow, that's a real tribute to your honesty and your honor there. So thanks for that, Harry. So we will wind things up at some point, but we talked about it earlier, Harry. There is an absolute plethora of books about U-boats. There's a host of websites. You've been doing it, you said yourself, 41 years. Without naming any names, what are the things that are written about U-boat skippers that really, you know, grind your gears? What are the things that you read about all the time and you go, why do people keep saying that? Either about them collectively or about some of the four men we've talked about tonight. Is there anything that really kind of just like fingernails on a chalkboard to you?
That's a good analogy. Incidentally, if any of your viewers want to ask more questions later on, sharkhunters@sharkhunters.com. Yeah, the bottom line, the common denominator with all these people, they're not researchers. They read this other stuff. Oh, Germans were all machine gunning people in the water because I read it here. And this is what you call circular logic. You write a book that you don't know what you're talking about, and I see it, and I write my own part that I don't know what's talking about. Then Joe down the street sees that book, and it goes round and around. Each guy works. I don't mean you and me specifically, but I mean they feed off of each other's foolishness. And I go there. I've been to Germany 2 times a year, every year from 1988 until the Kung Flu virus, and down to South America, where a lot went, 11 times. You go there. Boots on the ground is the only way to do it. people who write books because they read it in a library and they researched it, they're not researchers. They're just hacks.
Well, I think you've summed it up pretty well there, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I think we will end on a high, and people are already saying invite you back for a future show, so we can do that at some point. But I think we've only tapped into a tiny amount of your knowledge. At 41 years, you're not going to get it all. And in fact, you were saying that into your first emails to me. You were saying, how much do you want to know? Because, 4 decades of research, but it's been a taster, and I think we will end it there. And any kind of final words, about these guys and your work that you want to share with the viewers?
Yeah, with my work, I've been fortunate to meet so many guys from so many. I met the last living Victoria Cross winner was also a member. All of them, excluding the Japanese, all of them fought honorably, and they did what was necessary to stay alive and to do their part to win the war. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, your internet's going a bit fuzzy now, so we will end it there. Harry, it's been fantastic talking to you. I will be in touch again about a second appearance. Folks, you'll catch me again tomorrow night with Ian Ballantyne talking about British submarine operations, and then we've got various other shows this week. So you know the score, the description, the link to Harry's website, Shark Hunters, is in the description below. You'll be able to connect to that, and there's lots of information there. But I'll end it now. So thanks, Harry. Thanks, viewers. This is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying I will see you all again. Cheers, everybody. Bye.